King's Omen by Paul M. Williams is a five-part crime drama series chronicling the turbulent rise and fall of the Edwards crime family. The narrative centers on Bruce Edwards, a man bound by a bloodline steeped in violence and organized crime. Initially attempting to distance himself from this legacy, Bruce is drawn back into the underworld due to financial and personal pressures. As the series progresses across its 5 volumes, Bruce's journey is set against the backdrop of political maneuvering, social injustice, race riots, and an evolving criminal landscape. With that being said, hello and welcome to the first installment of the King's Omen Breakdowns, where we will be analyzing and dissecting each chapter of the series. We will be discussing key moments, and we'll be doing a deep dive into the psyche of the characters and pointing out many other symbolic moments across this universe. Hope you enjoy, and thanks for your time. Prologue: The Introduction of the Edwards Family. 1. Old Man Bruce Wheelchair Scene. This scene opens with a deliberately quiet and observational tone, focusing on Bruce Edwards, a frail elderly man in a wheelchair whose struggle to light a cigarette becomes an early symbol of decay, frustration, and the futility of control. The detailed camera-like description, his gray hair, the jerky motion of his arms, his face set against the light of the window, introduces the reader not only to Bruce's physical weakness, but to the emotional weariness that defines his existence. The lighter's weak flame symbolizes his dwindling vitality. His failure to get a spark mirrors the dying light within him, a man left with memories and ghosts instead of power and purpose. When he stands and observes the photos on his dresser, the tone shifts from external description to internal reckoning. The images tell his life story, family, crime, and legacy. The photos function as fragments of identity: grandfather, mother, mob boss. Yet instead of nostalgia, Bruce feels disgust, indicating self-awareness that borders on contempt. This moment reframes him not as a proud ex-gangster, but as a man ashamed of what defined him. His reflection that he was never happy in those pictures is powerful. It reveals a lifelong emotional void beneath the glamour and violence. The introduction of the reporter injects an external perspective that contrasts with Bruce's interior world. Through the younger man's eyes, Bruce's legend looms large, but to Bruce, this glorification is humiliating. His first line, "I never wanted to be a gangster," sets the thematic tone of disillusionment. The dialogue that follows showcases the power imbalance. Bruce reasserts authority through verbal intimidation, attempting to reclaim the dominance that age and guilt have eroded. Yet, this dominance feels hollow, a remnant of an old muscle memory rather than actual control. The discovery of personal objects in Bruce's room, the broken chicken bone, the burnt drawing, the scratched CD, the comic book, serves as ambient storytelling devices. Each item silently hints at loss, violence, and buried family trauma. They're relics of a life filled with ritual, corruption, and failed attempts at meaning. The chicken bone, likely once part of some symbolic act, and the burned paper, possibly connected to his daughter, bridge the tangible and psychological aspects of the narrative. The organization of the room contrasts with Bruce's internal chaos. It's meticulous, almost sterile, suggesting a man grasping for order in a life that was once defined by chaos. When Bruce finally lights his cigarette, it doubles as an act of small triumph and self-destruction, an old comfort returning at the cost of his health. His fatalism is apparent when he says, "If God wanted to take me out, he would be doing me a favor by now." It's not rebellion, but resignation, an echo of a man who has stopped bargaining with fate. The second half, transitioning to his confession and backstory, peels back the mythology to reveal tragedy. His motivation for turning to crime, to provide for his daughter Aurora, grounds his choices in pathos rather than greed. Bruce's reflection on poverty, fatherhood, and healthcare turns the story from a gangster confession into a lament for systemic failure and human pain. Aurora's schizophrenia and seizures humanize Bruce further. His love for her is unconditional, his guilt profound. In the flashback, Aurora's hallucination scene is written with disturbing intensity. Her drawing of headless kings burning their crowns is a metaphor for her family's disintegrating legacy, figures of power consumed by their own choices, observed helplessly by the next generation. Aurora's suffering during her seizure is presented almost cinematically, paralleling Bruce's internal collapse. The father's memory of her innocence and compassion directly contrasts with his current self-image as morally corrupted and fatigued. The cigarette smoke he inhales as he reminisces feels like a futile attempt to breathe life into the past, as if through smoke he can summon her spirit. Throughout the exchange with the reporter, the dialogue underscores generational and moral distance. The reporter represents society's superficial fascination with violence and notoriety. Bruce embodies the decay beneath that myth. His insistence that he fell into crime rather than chose it is both a defense and a confession. He oscillates between self-pity and accountability, revealing a man torn between pride and remorse. The story closes at a hinge point, Bruce ready to open up completely, promising to take the reader into the how, a deeper journey into the roots of his fall, both moral and emotional. Overall, the scene is layered with rich symbolism and cinematic texture. The lighter, the photographs, the room's order, the reporter's camera, and Aurora's drawings all feed into the overarching themes of power, guilt, legacy, and decay. The writing treats violence not as spectacle, but as emotional residue, a ghost that lingers in both memory and space. This makes Bruce less of a criminal archetype and more of a tragic figure whose life is defined by the failure of redemption, where the past remains painfully alive. 2. Burgers to go scene. This scene portrays Bruce Edwards at a breaking point in his life, merging his professional humiliation with his personal despair in a way that highlights his slow emotional unraveling. The writing builds tension through body language, dialogue rhythm, and detailed environmental cues, giving the sequence an almost cinematic realism that matches Bruce's inner volatility. The fast food setting, a deliberately mundane and soulless environment, serves as an ironic backdrop for Bruce's inflated sense of worth and wounded pride. The franchise, Burgers to Go, symbolizes the disposability of both labor and ambition. Bruce, sitting back in his chair with his hands folded like a gentleman, believes the promotion is guaranteed. His posture, a mix of arrogance and self-assurance, already frames the impending rejection as emotional devastation. The dialogue's pacing mirrors Bruce's denial and descent into outrage. His confidence disintegrates line by line as he goes from polished self-control to frustrated, cornered desperation. When the manager delivers the bad news, Bruce, you didn't get it, the power dynamic completely shifts. The scene becomes a psychological duel rather than a workplace conversation. The manager, described as a doctor about to give bad news, positions Bruce as both victim and volatile patient. His calmness, paired with his watchfulness toward Bruce's hands, adds quiet dread beneath the surface. It's not just about disappointment, it's about the fear of losing composure, of snapping under pressure. The visual detail of Bruce placing his hands firmly on the desk turns them into metaphors of contained fury, brick-like in their stillness. As Bruce argues his case for promotion, each line peels away a layer of his dignity. His appeals to fairness, "I done watched you promote all these young lazy slackers," are both pitiable and self-righteous. He is right that he's overlooked, but wrong in how he channels the bitterness. The manager's response, reminding Bruce that this is fast food, is a brutal reality check. This line crushes Bruce's illusion of significance, pointing to how deeply his self-worth depends on being respected in a job that offers little respect to anyone. The more the manager insists it's just burgers to go, the more Bruce's desperation feels tragic rather than petty. When Bruce mentions his wife and 4 children, his anger transforms into raw grievance. His speech dissolves from defensiveness into survival instinct. The dollar raise becomes symbolic. It's not about money, but dignity. His frustration has roots in socioeconomic exhaustion, in a system that rewards mediocrity and punishes endurance. His eruption, "You are taking food out of my kids' mouths, sir," is a plea more than a threat. Yet the threat lingers, partly in tone, partly in the way Bruce's movements grow sharper, and the dialogue rhythm shortens. The detail of his hands becoming fists is carefully used to sustain tension without actual violence. He remains a man on the verge, simmering rather than exploding. Once Bruce steps outside, the tone changes. The adrenaline fades, replaced by emptiness. The cigarette he can barely light mirrors the earlier scene from his older years, a recurring image of impotence and unrealized control. His cough, described almost mockingly, "Can't even catch a good smoke out here," becomes a symbol of frustration turned inward. The world around him, traffic, pedestrians, indifferent movement, feels distant and uncaring. The line, "What does it take, man?" echoes through this apathy, a cry to fate, but also to society at large. This framing captures the existential crisis beneath his pride, the helplessness of a man who's done everything right and still fallen short. The scene pivots sharply with the phone call from Bernadette. The tone abruptly shifts from claustrophobic frustration to urgent panic. The juxtaposition heightens the emotional blow. Just as Bruce's dignity collapses at work, his family collapses at home. The daughter's seizure represents both literal emergency and emotional metaphor. Aurora, fragile and dependent, embodies Bruce's reason for fighting so hard for meaning. The dialogue here is stripped of bravado. Bruce becomes human again, desperate and gentle. Positive energy around her, okay? She will be okay. It's a glimpse into the tender core buried beneath his hardness, a man who lashes out not because he's cruel, but because he's cornered by life's cruelty. The final image, Bruce's dropped cigarette burning out on the street, is quietly devastating. It symbolizes wasted effort, vanishing control, and unacknowledged struggle. The passerby stepping over it illustrates the world's indifference to individual suffering. What remains is the image of ashes spreading on the wind, an external reflection of Bruce's emotional disintegration. It ties back to earlier themes of futility and decay, his fight for validation, his family's pain, and the inevitability of being forgotten, no matter how hard he burns. This scene, though small in scope, is a study in frustration, pride, and despair. Every gesture and exchange reveals Bruce's dual identity, a proud man seeking dignity in a world that no longer rewards dignity. The domestic tragedy bleeding into his workplace humiliation makes the story larger than his personal failure. It becomes a critique of economic futility and the slow erosion of human worth under pressure. 3. Katrina and Kaleb's dilemma. This segment deepens the emotional scope of Bruce Edwards' story, moving from his fatalism as an old man to his memories of family dysfunction and generational decay. It blends introspection, domestic tension, and external chaos to reveal how corruption, trauma, and neglect ripple through the Edwards bloodline. The contrast between Bruce's reflective narration and the vivid present-day flashback conveys how the past bleeds into the future. His children inherit not just his genetics, but his moral fractures and bitterness. The opening dialogue between Bruce and the reporter reestablishes his confessional tone, but the focus shifts from his own sins to the moral rot within his family. His description of Bernadette is tender yet tinged with guilt. The line about her imagining a world where she could have become a star frames her as a mirror of Bruce's failed dreams. Both lost their vocations to duty and tragedy. Bernadette's silence becomes symbolic. Her sacrifice and emotional death parallel Bruce's, suggesting that even love in this family is transactional and self-destructive. When Bruce turns to his twins, the narrative sharpens in tone and moral contrast. Katrina's description is chilling, a character born without empathy, described not as corrupted but constitutionally evil. This isn't simply fatherly bitterness. It reads as both confession and warning. Bruce's careful differentiation between those who do bad things and those who are bad by nature introduces a moral taxonomy that haunts the entire story. His mother, Angela, becomes a haunting reference point, a woman capable of monstrous acts yet still humane. Katrina, in Bruce's eyes, represents the opposite, a sociopathic emptiness cloaked in beauty and talent. In her, Bruce seems to recognize the worst parts of himself stripped of remorse. Kaleb, on the other hand, embodies the innocence and decency that Bruce idealizes but never achieved. His fascination with science and reluctance toward confrontation turn him into the moral foil for both his sister and father. He is reasonable, empathetic, but terribly naive, traits that make him vulnerable in an unforgiving world. This dynamic subtly reinforces one of the story's major themes: the struggle between survival instincts and moral conscience inside environments that don't reward virtue. The flashback cuts sharply to Katrina's school play rehearsal, immediately humanizing her arrogance and situational cruelty. Her frustration about her family missing her performance feels superficially relatable, but quickly mutates into selfish venom. When she receives the text about Aurora's seizure, the audience witnesses her transformation from irritation to hostility. Her tantrum, "I swear to God, if they can't make it tonight, I'll kill her before those seizures do," feels simultaneously adolescent and chillingly sincere. She is not merely jealous, she is consumed by a pathological need for control and attention. The language, full of sudden capitalization and short exclamations, captures teenage fury, but also suggests something more psychologically disturbed. Caleb's phone conversation provides emotional equilibrium. He responds with empathy, trying to reason with Katrina through moral logic and familial loyalty. His dialogue embodies compassion and intellect, but also futility. Logic cannot penetrate Katrina's narcissism. The moment when Katrina mocks Aurora's mental illness, "That chick is crazy, she should have been committed a long time ago," deepens her cruelty and echoes Bruce's earlier ruminations about inherited darkness. Her dismissal of Aurora's suffering parallels the world's dismissal of Bruce's humanity, a cyclical absence of empathy passing down generations like a curse. Caleb's movement through the rioting city introduces a new thematic layer: social chaos as an external reflection of family chaos. The image of burning cars, broken windows, and frightened masses parallels Bruce's domestic implosion. The violent world outside mirrors the violent dynamics within. The riot isn't only a social event, it's a metaphor for moral collapse. Caleb's fearful line, "Jesus cat, I'm never going to make it out of here alive," juxtaposes the apocalyptic imagery with raw human vulnerability, grounding the chaos in loved terror. Katrina's dismissive response, "It's just a riot," encapsulates her detachment from reality. It illustrates how egocentrism blinds her to suffering both near and far. The fact that she returns to rehearsal immediately after this conversation feels grotesque and telling. Art becomes performance without empathy. She inhabits her role on stage, but lacks the soul to recognize life's drama unfolding around her. This portion of the story demonstrates striking emotional architecture. On one level, it is a study of generational behavior, how neglect and trauma metastasize into emotional cruelty. On another, it's a psychological exploration of identity within social decay. Bruce's musings, the twins' argument, and the background of riots all interlock to form a single thematic statement that moral collapse begins at home. The personal and the political merge. The riots outside Cleveland mirror the riots inside the Edwards family, both born from neglect, anger, and the desperate need to be heard. The sequence's visual and tonal contrasts heighten its cinematic power. The quiet reminiscence of an old man versus the noise of a chaotic city. The caring brother versus the narcissistic sister. Love transformed into resentment. A play rehearsal, illusion, versus a riot, reality. Every detail, the text message, the burning cars, the rising tension in dialogue, advances the underlying tragedy that the Edwards family has been in slow collapse for generations. The results of these fractures are not just personal but existential, leaving Bruce, Katrina, Kaleb, and Aurora all trapped in their own forms of isolation, unable to save or fully condemn one another. 4. Waiting room scene. This scene captures the unraveling of both family and individual within a broader atmosphere of social collapse, drawing powerful parallels between private despair and public chaos. It unfolds in three tonal movements: Intimate despair between Bruce and Bernadette, societal turmoil on television, and the personal explosion of their daughter, Katrina. All three layers merge thematically to create a picture of generational emotional corrosion, a family and a city both reaching tipping points. In the waiting room, the atmosphere is heavy and slow. The details, the couple holding hands, the lingering eye contact, Bruce's fixation on the floor, convey silent suffering more effectively than words. His shame is as palpable as his exhaustion. His confession, "I got passed over again," deepens his characterization as a man who measures his worth through his ability to provide. The guilt that floods him when he connects his workplace failure to Aurora's medical suffering is devastating. It's irrational, but entirely human, a blend of masculine pride, economic anxiety, and parental helplessness. His anger, while superficially directed at his employer, is actually aimed inward, a manifestation of complete self-blame. Bernadette serves as the emotional counterbalance, realistic, steady, yet exhausted in her own way. Her dialogue frames the tragedy with a moral pragmatism. She rejects Bruce's belief that money could have saved their daughter, reminding him that love is the only consistent force in their fractured world. Her line about millionaires being just as scared is a crucial moment. It dismantles his illusion that financial stability equals emotional security. She exposes the deeper theme beneath Bruce's despair, that no economic or social construct can shield people from fear, loss, or injustice. These lines resonate beyond the couple. They echo through the larger tragedy of their city, where riots rage over systemic inequalities. The television broadcast breaks the emotional intimacy of the scene, pulling the couple into a larger narrative of societal breakdown. The riot coverage is not just exposition, but metaphor. The city burning outside mirrors Bruce's inner collapse. His feeling that we're at the bottom of the totem pole, we will die first, transitions the personal into the existential. Bernadette's defiant optimism contrasts again with his fatalism, her will to hope acting as one of the few remaining stabilizers in their family. Notably, she clinches his hand tighter just after saying, "You were always there for us," grounding him back into the tangible world of love and reality, even as chaos consumes both their lives and their city. The cracked tile on the floor, which Bruce fixates on, becomes a subtly perfect metaphor, the literal fracture beneath them representing the figurative one splitting their family and society apart. It's small, unaddressed, and easy to ignore, but it carries the weight of everything they aren't fixing. The transition to the discussion about their daughters recalibrates the emotional temperature. The dialogue exposes divergent worldviews, Bernadette's cautious empathy against Bruce's moral absolutism. Bruce's correction that Katrina is the evil one, Roland is just bad, draws a sharp distinction between nature and nurture, mirroring his older self's categorization from earlier scenes. This repeated moral dichotomy solidifies how Bruce conceptualizes humanity. People are either fundamentally good but damaged or innately cruel. His obsessive moral labeling shows his need to rationalize the disorder around him. It's how he makes sense of failure, by seeing evil as an inherent trait rather than a learned behavior. The subsequent sequences with Katrina dramatize everything the parents just debated. Katrina's backstage meltdown is a portrait of cruelty born from insecurity. She sees herself as perpetually overshadowed, and her rage toward Aurora's illness exposes her incapacity for empathy. Her attack on Jasmine is especially revealing. Katrina transfers her jealousy of Aurora onto another target, destroying someone equally young and innocent. The layers of her cruelty, mocking Jasmine's singing, her appearance, her family, don't just reflect jealousy. They demonstrate projection. Katrina's insults about Jasmine's broken family and absentee mother subconsciously reflect her own terrified resentment of Bernadette's attention toward Aurora. When Kat snaps, the pacing accelerates. Her words become erratic, cruel, and uncontrolled, but each insult carries a trace of self-hatred. Her tears at the end, paired with her smirk, are symbolic confusion, the fusion of satisfaction and remorse, perhaps pride in her own destructiveness. The teary-eyed smirk is one of the most powerful images in the story so far, a child recognizing her own cruelty and deriving twisted relief from it. This complex emotional duality reveals Katrina's core, rage fueled by abandonment, craving attention even through destruction. Thematically, this entire sequence juxtaposes moral decay at 3 scales. On the personal level, Bruce is breaking apart, plagued by failure and guilt. On the familial level, the Edwardses are fractured into love, resentment, and disconnection. On the societal level, the riots on television reflect chaos spreading beyond the home, disorder born from pain, injustice, and neglect. Visually and structurally, it's all interconnected. The riot on the screen mirrors Katrina's outburst. Both are eruptions of suppressed anger. Bruce's fixation on a crack in the floor mirrors the brokenness beneath his daughter's smile. The emotional rhythm of the scene moves from quiet despair to explosive confrontation, ending on another image of emotional wreckage, a child crying and another smirking through the tears. It's a haunting reminder that chaos, whether social or personal, doesn't start suddenly. It seeps through ignored fractures until everything collapses. 5. Riot Scene. This scene explores the volatile temperament of young Roland Edwards while contrasting it with Kaleb's gentleness and fear, underscoring the generational reproduction of violence and tension within both the family and their social environment. Through Bruce's weary narration and the vivid street encounter, the story weaves individual rage into the broader social chaos of the riots, illustrating how environment, neglect, and inherited anger shape identity. When Old Man Bruce begins his narration, his tone combines exasperation, regret, and detached recognition. His comment that Roland was born angry carries enormous weight. It marks the child not as a product of circumstance, but as another in the cycle of rage that seems to run through the Edwards line, an echo of Bruce's own aggression and self-hatred. He speaks of Roland's temper and expulsions as though recounting a history of defeat, describing him as both menace and mystery, mad at the world, without cause. This rhetorical distance, though calm, is loaded with guilt. Bruce is partially acknowledging that the anger didn't come from nowhere. The mention of bringing in a guidance counselor shows a family both desperate and helpless, capable of trying but unable to connect meaningfully. The shift to Kaleb and Roland walking home pulls us directly into the chaos Bruce has introduced. The setting is saturated with danger. The riots provide a backdrop that is both literal and symbolic. The streets aflame, the disorder, the groups of armed young men, all externalize what already exists inside the Edwards household: fractured relationships, power struggles, fear, and resentment. The setting's intensity makes Kaleb's small gesture, offering Roland his hand, painfully tender. It's a human act fighting to survive in an inhuman environment. Roland's rejection of that gesture, mocking his brother's affection as weakness, establishes him as the hardened offspring of trauma. His hostility isn't just macho posturing, it's emotional armor. By refusing touch, Roland refuses vulnerability. The gang encounter heightens this dynamic. The writing skillfully captures the tension through rhythm. The dialogue shortens, movements become deliberate, breaths heavier. Kaleb's nervousness contrasts sharply with Roland's apathy. The gang leader's repeated question, "Who you with?" mirrors the scene's central moral question: where do these brothers belong in a world of divided loyalties and constant violence? Kaleb's indecision becomes symbolic. He represents the frightened middle class, or those trying to become it, caught between moral conviction and survival instinct. Roland's audacity, however, secures their safety. In a single, shocking outburst, "Man, fuck the police," he exhibits the aggression that Bruce lamented and also the survival instinct Kaleb lacks. Violence protects them, even if it corrodes everything else. The moment following the gang's departure is crucial. The gang leader's whispered insult, "The little homie has more balls than you," is devastating. It cements Kaleb's humiliation, and it validates Roland's worst impulses. Roland has learned that courage equals recklessness, and silence equals weakness. In the microcosm of that encounter, the moral order is inverted. To live, one must perform toughness, not empathy. Kaleb gasping for air and Roland urging him forward encapsulates the brothers' relationship, one fragile but moral, the other vicious but effective. Together, they embody two feudal survival strategies in a collapsing world: submission and aggression. From a thematic perspective, this scene continues the story's exploration of cycles of anger and the illusion of control. Bruce's line about Roland being born angry could apply to himself, his own mother, or even to society as a whole. The Edwards bloodline becomes a symbol of generational trauma. Each person inherits not just features or talents, but the unresolved fury and moral confusion of their predecessors. Roland's defiance reflects Bruce's own inability to contain his rage earlier in life, while Kaleb's nervous passivity reflects Bruce's later self, paralyzed by guilt and futility. In each family member, a different fragment of Bruce's psyche manifests, suggesting that his children collectively represent the splintered pieces of his own moral being. The riot setting grounds all of this in a larger socio-political framework. The reference to the death of Rodney Coates and the militant energy of Theodore Black's movement ties these personal struggles to systemic injustice. The question, "Who you with?" forces both boys and the audience to confront how identity and alignment are determined in a world polarized by survival. It's no longer enough to be neutral or humane. Neutrality itself becomes a sin. The world's injustices and the family's wounds mirror each other perfectly. Both systems demand allegiance to violence to preserve dignity. The interactions ending with Roland's casual dominance closes the scene on tragedy disguised as tenderness. Roland's gesture of putting his arm around Kaleb seems affectionate, but it's controlling. He becomes protector and leader, the role Kaleb should have held as the elder brother. The symbolism of this reversal is subtle but piercing. Power flows downward now into youth and anger, while compassion gasps for breath behind it. Their walk home, continuing through streets littered with proof of society's collapse, feels like a march deeper into the cycle of inherited rage that Bruce can only describe but never undo. This scene, in its compactness, elegantly integrates its character study, social commentary, and familial tragedy. It reveals Roland not as an anomaly, but as the purest expression of everything Bruce has tried and failed to suppress, the final generation raised on bitterness, survival, and disillusionment. 6. Doctor Scene. This scene functions as the emotional center of the family's unraveling, a convergence of guilt, pride, poverty, love, and frustration. It weaves three moments together in haunting parallel: the intimate stillness of a hospital room, the tense moral clash between Bruce and the doctor, and the distant heartbreak of Katrina's performance. The tonal structure is deliberate, quiet compassion shifting rapidly into social outrage, mirroring Bruce's volatile mental state and his inability to process shame without aggression. The opening movement, with Bruce and Bernadette in the waiting room, begins with a moment of fragile human unity. Their clasped hands and shared anxiety create a rare sense of togetherness in an otherwise fractured marriage. But the instant the doctor appears, the conversation veers back toward blame and helplessness. The description of Bruce, staring at the floor like he is directly blaming Satan for all his problems, symbolizes his dangerous isolation. He externalizes guilt by demonizing the world around him rather than confronting his powerlessness. When he finally sees Aurora alive, the emotional language softens. His gesture of placing his hand gently on her face signifies deep paternal tenderness. For a fleeting moment, his anger dissolves into love and despair. Yet, even this peace cannot last. The narrative constantly returns Bruce to confrontation, as if compassion itself triggers defensive fury. The dialogue between the doctor and the parents is meticulously crafted as a clash between emotion and logic, between lived pain and institutional indifference. The doctor's professionalism, measured, clinical, slightly detached, collides with Bruce's desperation. While she speaks in medical terms, Episode: Severe Schizophrenia, Unpredictable. Bruce insists on moral language. My daughter is not sick. This distinction defines the scene's emotional core. Bruce's rage is not just directed at the doctor, but at the world that labels, quantifies, and diagnoses what he experiences as love and failure. His correction from disease to disorder is emblematic. He refuses to let his daughter's suffering be pathologized because that would confirm his inability to protect her. Pride disguises despair here. Bruce's moral vocabulary masks the hollowness of his finances, the frustration of being unable to afford the very medication that might save his daughter's life. Bernadette, in contrast, continues to play her recurring role as mediator, her empathy slicing through the scene's tension. Yet her compassion is tinged with quiet defeat. Her repeated wish to defuse Bruce's anger reveals exhaustion rather than optimism. She apologizes to the doctor not just on Bruce's behalf, but for the burden of their entire existence. This small detail, that she says, he's usually not this bad, is heartbreaking. It suggests that while Bruce's bursts of anger feel explosive in the moment, they are habitual, predictable patterns of a man who has fought too long against invisible systems of failure. When the doctor hands her the medicine, the symbolic stakes crystallize. The pill bottle is more than treatment. It represents charity, humiliation, and the boundaries of dignity. Bruce's violent rejection of it, "Do we look like a charity case to you?" dramatizes how pride overrides pragmatism in impoverished conditions. His anger is tragic precisely because it's misplaced. He believes that accepting help compromises his role as provider, so he sabotages the very opportunity that might preserve his child. The slammed bottle becomes an emblem of working-class masculinity under pressure, where dignity and love clash fatally against survival. The doctor's silence as she leaves the room amplifies the moral failure unfolding before Aurora's unconscious body. The scene's spatial arrangement underscores metaphor. The parents arguing at the bedside while their daughter, literally immobile, silent, and dependent, lies between them like the embodiment of everything broken in their marriage. Love becomes performative. They are speaking over her rather than to her. The hospital, rather than being a place of healing, becomes a stage for guilt, resentment, and survival instinct. This domestic microcosm mirrors the social disorder outside. The same pride and misunderstanding fueling riots on the streets now consumes the family's private life. The narrative's final cut to Katrina's performance intensifies the tragedy. The juxtaposition between Aurora's sterile hospital bed and Katrina's tearful stage delivers emotional whiplash. One daughter sings out her loneliness to an audience unaware of her pain, while the other lies unconscious, her family fragmented around her. The writing fuses sound and silence. The song becomes a lament that bridges the sisters' experiences without their ever interacting. The dual imagery of Aurora suspended between life and death, and Katrina singing in tears to an empty audience where her parents' seats remain vacant, encapsulates generational yearning. Both girls are crying out for their parents' attention in different ways. One through illness, the other through art, and both remain unseen. Every emotional thread in this chapter bleeds through class, identity, and pride. Bruce's inability to accept help, Bernadette's exhaustion, Aurora's fragility, and Katrina's alienation all reflect the same systemic condition: people crushed beneath circumstances that warp love into anger. The scene ends not with peace, but with fragmentation. Three people in three different spaces, all yearning for connection, but separated by economics, guilt, and ego. It positions the Edwards family as a tragic mirror of their burning city, a collection of souls fighting for dignity in a world that confuses healing with weakness and love with defeat. 7. Roland's destruction scene. This scene captures one of the most chaotic and emotionally crucial moments for the Edwards family, shifting from domestic comedy to alarming tragedy within a matter of seconds. The writing uses pacing, contrast, and sensory detail to mirror the volatility at the heart of both the household and the narrative itself. Roland's impulsive mischief and Caleb's fragile composure explode, literally and symbolically, demonstrating how quickly unaddressed anger, neglect, and sibling tension can spiral into irreversible consequences. The setup cleverly begins with something deceptively mundane: Caleb in the bathroom, momentarily vulnerable and unaware, performing one of life's most ordinary routines. The detail of the toilet seat dropping grounds the scene in realism and gives Roland a cue to act, making the chaos that follows feel disturbingly plausible. This everyday domestic noise becomes a trigger for disaster. It also emphasizes how thin the boundary is between safety and chaos in their household, where minor moments of privacy are constantly violated. Roland's entrance into his brother's room is described with the deliberate pacing of a mischievous predator, creeping, pausing, listening. What makes this scene psychologically rich is that Roland's act of destruction is both juvenile and deeply symbolic. His fascination, the line "Uhu cool," immediately after the explosion, shows a child's unfiltered delight in chaos, a dangerous curiosity that mirrors his father's earlier eruptions of rage. The destruction of Caleb's science project serves as a symbolic reversal, where Caleb applies logic, patience, and creativity. Roland responds with impulsive energy and brute force. It's not just a sibling prank, it's destruction of intellect by chaos, logic consumed by anger. Thematically, this echoes the broader motif of the family's collapse, reason continuously undermined by impulse. The sight of Caleb running in panic, pants still half down, introduces a moment of dark humor before spiraling into catastrophe. The humor, however, dies swiftly. It transitions into distress when the reader realizes the emotional gravity of what's just happened. Caleb's reaction, trying to piece back together his destroyed project, is heartbreaking. It is a literal image of futile restoration, the boy physically assembling fragments that cannot fit again. It parallels his parents' emotional helplessness, especially Bruce's earlier inability to fix Aurora's illness or his own economic failures. Caleb's frantic hands in the rubble convey the tragedy of lost control. The chase sequence ramps up kinetic tension. The movement through the home, slamming doors, slippery floors, sharp turns, transforms their living space into a war zone. The choice to describe the setting through physical chaos, cracked walls, torn objects, rushing footsteps, turns the house into an embodiment of the family's disarray. Roland running from consequences, laughing and panicking, suggests both childishness and foreshadowing. This boy is on a trajectory similar to his father's temper-driven self-destruction. The sudden collapse of Caleb shifts the entire tonal register. The dizziness and spinning room abruptly end the chase and replace energy with dread. The moment feels cinematic, the camera closing in on Caleb's disoriented face, Roland frozen in shock as his brother crumples through the table. The aftermath, the magazine scattered around his unconscious body, evokes a surreal calm after chaos. For the first time, Roland's bravado dissolves into genuine fear. His staccato please, Caleb? Caleb, capture the helplessness of a child who has outpaced his own comprehension of violence. The repetition, the shaking, the sudden stillness, all communicate panic untarnished by ego. In this rare moment, Roland becomes humanized. He realizes the gravity of destruction too late. Thematically, the scene's architecture fits perfectly within the pattern established throughout the story. Each family member represents a different psychological fracture. Bruce channels anger outward through dominance and denial. Katrina manipulates others through cruelty. Aurora internalizes chaos through psychosis. And now Roland manifests it through impulsive harm. Caleb, meanwhile, represents reason, empathy, and intellect in a world where those qualities are punished. His fainting, or medical emergency, acts as a metaphorical collapse of order. When reason collapses, all that remains is reactive instinct, and that's the tragedy of the Edwards family. Another important layer is symmetry. Caleb's faint echoes Aurora's seizures, implying that the siblings are bound by shared vulnerability even if no one notices. Both Caleb and Aurora carry the emotional weight of the household, suffering the fallout of the louder personalities around them. Roland's frantic guilt mirrors Bruce's self-blame over Aurora's illness, linking father and son through the inability to undo harm once it's done. From a structural point of view, this moment functions as an escalation scene, a midpoint rupture before larger tragedy strikes. It reveals Roland's loss of innocence and Caleb's fragile humanity while pushing the reader toward the inevitable consequences. The tone's progression, from humor to panic to dread, is deliberately jarring but true to life in families living at the edge of psychological and social breakdown. Each beat, the toilet flush, the explosion, the scream, the blackout, marks a step deeper into dysfunction. Ultimately, the scene is about the cost of neglect and unchecked emotion. What begins as childish rebellion quickly mutates into genuine tragedy because no system of love, attention, or control exists to contain it. The moment Caleb falls, time seems to stop not only for Roland, but for the entire family's moral equilibrium. This is the instant when it becomes clear that dysfunction has moved from being emotional to physical, no longer just words or regrets, but tangible danger, irreversible damage. The house, once the arena of arguments and resentment, has become the site of collapse. Chaos is no longer looming outside in the form of riots or poverty. It is now erupting in their own living room, among their children,